Imagine flying for hours over endless white. You finally arrive, you step outside, the air bites your face. The nearest neighboring town may not even have a road connecting it. You look at a map. This island is bigger than Mexico, bigger than Saudi Arabia, almost 4 times the size of France. Yet fewer people live here than in a small American town. Why? What could make one of the biggest places on Earth almost empty? The answer has very little to do with size and almost everything to do with ice. Most of us grow up looking at the same world map, and that map quietly tells us a lie. Look at Greenland. It looks gigantic, almost as large as Africa. Sometimes it even looks bigger, but that's impossible. Africa is actually about 14 times larger. The reason is something called the Mercator projection. A map designed hundreds of years ago. It helped sailors navigate oceans, but it came with a strange side effect. The farther north you go, the more land gets stretched. Countries near the equator stay close to their real size. Countries near the poles become giants. So Greenland became famous for looking much larger than it really is. But here's the twist. Even after correcting the map, Greenland is still enormous, around 2.16 million square kilometers, making it the largest island on Earth. If Greenland is truly that big, why doesn't anyone live there? Because what looks like land mostly isn't. Imagine buying a house, but 80% of the property is buried under nearly 2 miles of solid ice. That's Greenland. About 80% of the island is covered by one massive ice sheet. Not snow, ice. Some of it formed hundreds of thousands of years ago. In places, it's over 3 kilometers thick. If all that ice suddenly disappeared, Greenland wouldn't become a flat green island. It would reveal giant valleys, hidden mountains, massive lakes, even a huge basin below sea level. The weight of the ice is so enormous that it actually pushes the land downward. The island is literally being crushed by its own frozen blanket, and that ice changes everything. You can't farm on it. You can't build cities on it. You can't even travel across much of it easily. So people gather where the ice ends, along the narrow coastline. But surviving there creates another problem. Imagine living in a country where visiting the next town requires an airplane, or a helicopter, or a boat. That sounds impossible, yet that's everyday life in Greenland. There are no highways connecting cities, no interstate system, no cross-country railway. In fact, most towns are completely isolated. The capital, Nuuk, has roads, but those roads end just outside the city. If someone wants to visit another town, driving isn't an option because there simply is nowhere to drive. Mountains, fjords, glaciers, and endless ice block almost every route. Instead, Greenland built its transportation system around the sea and the sky. Boats become highways, small aircraft become buses, helicopters become taxis. It works, but it also makes almost everything expensive. And that brings us to the next challenge. Imagine paying several dollars for a single tomato, or waiting weeks for basic supplies. Most of Greenland's food arrives by ship. Some remote villages only receive deliveries a few times each year. Everything costs more. Building materials, fuel, cars, medicine, even internet infrastructure. Heating alone becomes a major expense. During winter, temperatures can stay far below freezing for months. The sun disappears for weeks in some places. In northern Greenland, there are periods when daylight never arrives. And then, months later, the opposite happens. The sun refuses to set. Living here isn't impossible, but every ordinary task becomes harder. Yet despite all these obstacles, people have called Greenland home for over 1,000 years. Long before satellites, before airports, before modern heating, the Inuit already understood Greenland. Instead of fighting nature, they adapted to it. They hunted seals, fish, whales, caribou. They learned to read snow, ocean currents, sea ice, even the wind. Knowledge became survival. European settlers eventually arrived. The Norse built farms along Greenland's southern coast around 1,000 years ago. For centuries, they survived. Then, they disappeared. Historians still debate exactly why. Climate change, isolation, economic collapse, or perhaps a combination of all three. Greenland has always rewarded adaptation and punished those who underestimated it. Even today, modern life still depends on respecting nature. But something extraordinary is happening. The ice is changing. For centuries, Greenland was mostly forgotten. A remote Arctic island, far away from global politics. Today, that is no longer true. As the Arctic warms, sea ice shrinks. New shipping routes become possible. Minerals once trapped beneath ice may become easier to reach. Rare earth elements, critical metals, untapped resources. Suddenly, countries around the world are paying attention. The United States maintains military facilities here. China has shown interest. Europe watches closely. Because Greenland sits between North America and Europe, in one of the most strategic locations on Earth. The island hasn't moved. The world around it has. And that raises one final question. Could Greenland ever become heavily populated? Probably not. Even if parts of the ice melt, the climate will remain harsh. Infrastructure remains difficult. Nature still sets the rules. Some places simply aren't meant to become megacities, and maybe that's exactly what makes them valuable. When we look at a map, we instinctively think big land means big population, more space, more cities, more people. Greenland quietly reminds us that geography doesn't care about our assumptions. A place can be enormous and still be almost empty. Because civilization isn't built on size, it's built on conditions. Fresh water, food, climate, transportation, opportunity. Remove just one of those, life becomes harder. Remove all of them, and even the biggest island on Earth can remain nearly empty. Perhaps Greenland isn't empty because humans failed. Perhaps it's one of the few places where nature still decides who gets to stay. And maybe the better question was never, why doesn't anyone live in Greenland? Maybe it's, how do the people who already live there make it work?